Instead, we have the opportunity to make a habit of empathy, to recognize ourselves in each other.
Hi, it's Edwin Rutsch from the Center for Building a Culture of Empathy, and I'm here today with Marc Bekoff. And Marc is a well-known advocate for animal rights, and we're going to be talking today about how to build a culture of empathy. And perhaps you could just first start off, Marc, by introducing yourself, a little bit more about your background, and if you want to talk about your website, I can also bring that up as well.
Oh, okay. Um, right. So it's Marc
Oh,
Bekoff.
Bekoff, sorry.
It's okay. I taught biology at the University of Colorado for decades, specializing in animal behavior, courses in behavioral ecology, animal cognition, conservation behavior. Um, that's been my Those have been my major interests for decades. I did a lot of work on field work on the social behavior and ecology of coyotes living in the Grand Teton National Park outside of Jackson, Wyoming. And I've studied birds around my house. I live in the mountains outside of Boulder, Colorado. And I also studied penguins in Antarctica and various other non-human animal beings. And I've always been interested in animal protection. I refused to dissect animals in high school and in college, and dropped out of an MD PhD program because I didn't want to have to kill dogs as part of my research. So when I look back at things, I've always been motivated by compassion for animals and, in general, just the whole notion of empathy.
Hmm. Well, I was actually I'm on your website right now showing it on the books section, and at the top here we see you with Bessie,
Oh, yeah.
and you're in Orland, it looks like, and I kind of scrolled down the list of books. I mean, it is a long list. So you've been doing this for quite a while.
Yeah, I like to write, and and I find it easy to do. So yeah, I realized that I actually wrote one of my first papers on animal protection and empathy back in the mid '70s. I forgot all about it, but it was in response to some horrific research that was being done on mice. And but like I said, I've just always been. I guess I just always thought that non-human animals should be protected. I mean, I don't. Frankly, sometimes I don't know if they need rights or that's the right way to go. I like to talk about animal protection, not animal welfare or animal rights. Animal welfare, in many ways, is a cop out because it really stresses that if you do certain things for animals, like if you provide them good food and veterinary care and a nice little cage or a place to live, you have their best interests and their welfare or well-being in mind. And animal rights, although I'd love to see animals have rights to life and liberty and the right not to be tortured, it turns off a lot of people. And so I find that I can make greater inroads when I talk about compassion and empathy for animals in terms of just animal protection. And it's almost impossible. I mean, some people are, but it's almost impossible to be against animal protection. It's easy for people to be against animal rights because they just don't understand what it means. So rather than having that hurdle through which to jump, I'd rather just talk about animal protection.
Hmm.
So
Well,
yeah,
well, what
yeah,
I'm kind of looking at is how do we build a culture of empathy and compassion, kind of in the largest sense.
right.
And it seems that looking at that, how do we have empathy and compassion for animals is kind of a part of that. So, do you have any thoughts about how we can go about building a culture of empathy?
Yeah, I think about that a lot. In fact, a book that I just sent off, an edited book that I just sent off that will be out next year is called Ignoring Nature No More, The Case for Compassionate Conservation. And so I see lots of ways that we can build a culture of empathy. And given my own interests, I see compassionate conservation as actually being almost like a social movement. It's acting as a collective, getting people to have people with common interests to pursue them. and to act on their feelings of empathy, if you will. You know, it's really hard to find people who don't, quote, empathize with animals, who don't care about animals. I mean, they care about them in ways different than I might and you might, but they do care about them. So to me, the important thing is trying to show them and explain to them rather than tell them, because people don't like to be told anything, but show them by example how empathy and compassion can really be cashed out in terms of actions for animals. You know, in a sense, actions that help animals, but also help ourselves. You know, not everyone is going to be motivated by an interest in helping animals only. They want to know if there's any kind of, you know, payoff for humans. So I just say, well, yeah, we feel better when we help other animals, and we have to remember that we too are, you know, animals. So I kind of see the social movement maybe centering on what's called compassionate conservation to be a good step forward. And like I said, bringing people together with common interests who might go about achieving certain goals in different ways. So I work with conservation biologists who say they have compassion for animals, and maybe they're more compassionate about species, whereas I'm more interested in individual animals. So how do we bring those two usually divergent interests together? You know, people who are interested in the well-being and protecting individuals versus those who want to protect species. People who want to protect species often say, well, we might just have to trade off the lives of some individuals for the good of their own or other species. I don't like that point of view. So I try to show them how empathy for individuals has to really be the prevailing way to think, and then go from there. So
what does that that look like? Empathy for kind of individuals. What does that mean?
I mean, it would mean, like, you know, for example, if you think about the reintroduction of wolves to Yellowstone, you know, after they were killed off by humans, we've reintroduced them. They're doing well. Of course, they've lost their protection, so now we're in sort of risking killing them off again, and in 30 years somebody will want to reintroduce them. But what it looks like is saying, well, some individual wolves died for the good of their species. Individuals who were, you know, kidnapped in Canada or Alaska and brought down to Yellowstone, for example. So my take on that is that was wrong to do. I mean, I'm not totally against the project, and maybe if it were redone, it would be done in a more empathic and compassionate way. But those would be the sorts of questions. Was it worth it, you know, to sort of, you know, take animals from one place, bring them back to another, have them succeed, reproduce, and thrive, remove their protection from the Endangered Species Act, and then have them being wantonly killed, which they are. So I think that's wrong. I mean, not only is it ethically and morally wrong, it's a total waste of time and money. So that's what, you know, it would look like, getting people behind and say, well, how can we, if you will, recreate or restore ecosystems in a more humane way? What it might also look like, frankly, is that certain projects just would not be done if they couldn't be done with that kind of empathic. Yeah.
So it's like go into creating ecological, I don't know, environments where the animals can just kind of live their traditional lives. Is kind of, you seeing that as kind of empathy? Is that?
I guess I'm looking at it on a more personal level. I'm writing a book now called Rewilding Our Hearts, and the notion of rewilding has been popular in conservation biology for rewilding species, building corridors. Like the famous example is called the Y to Y corridor, which is the Yukon to the Yucatan, where you have corridors where animals can live. Biologists build underground tunnels, and they build bridges, you know, wildlife bridges, so the animals are free to roam. Okay, I see rewilding on a more personal level of rewilding our hearts, building corridors within ourselves, among ourselves, to allow animals to exist. So I think the basis, I mean, it's a work in progress, but I was just writing today that I think the basis, or the basic element for rewilding our hearts is to develop a culture of empathy. You know, where people feel comfortable in terms of talking about it. You know, scientists, like a lot of my colleagues, they shudder when they hear the words compassion or empathy, for example, because they always argue, well, you know, of course we're compassionate, and part of compassion would be killing other animals, or of course we empathize with the pain and suffering of other animals, but that doesn't mean we can't kill them. And I violently disagree. I hate to use the word violently. I radically disagree. And so I see the culture of empathy. In fact, I was writing about this today and using your work, saying that, you know, really the outcome would be sort of weaving in a rewilding process of our own hearts, of our own minds, of our own psyches, and making that be kind of like the paradigm for building a culture of empathy.
So is it the rewilding kind of getting back to our inner nature? Is that it's something about connecting to ourselves, to some kind of a deeper truth or a deeper something. I guess I'm not quite sure. I'm kind of looking to really grasp what it is.
Well, it's reconnecting to who we are, because more and more data are coming out for both non-human and human animals that we're much more compassionate and fair and empathic than we've ever thought ourselves to be. There's wonderful books. There's one called Super Cooperators. Daka Keltner at Berkeley wrote a book, Born to be Good. In fact, my book, The Animal Manifesto, is kind of like an animal version of his Born to be Good, arguing that non-human animals are predominantly compassionate and cooperative and empathic. Sure, they fight with one another, and sure, they harm one another, but the research that's being done has shown that across species, more than 90 to 95% of all their behavior is what we call prosocial or positive. So it's the fighting and the discord that gets attention. But the fact of the matter is, these animals are primarily cooperative, and a lot of the basis for cooperation would be compassion and empathy.
So the rewilding is almost like getting back to our own inner empathy.
Exactly.
In a sense, it's like we're seeing that empathy is like a basic core value in all of us, and perhaps in animals as well.
Exactly. I was writing today that we need to make empathy and compassion social values. Exactly. And it's not asking us to, and you're exactly right, it's not asking us to do or be anybody other than who we are. And so that's a paradigm shift, and it's going to take a while. It's not going to happen overnight, but I think it's going to catch on, because there's also this wonderful research that shows that it feels good to be fair. It feels good to be nice. When we do nice things or cooperative things, or we display empathy, the reward systems in our brains fire, and we get positive reinforcement. So there was a popular article written in the New York Times based on really great scientific research that was called "It Feels Good to Be Nice." So once again, not only is it our basic core values to be nice and good and empathic and compassionate, but it feels good to be that way. So I think it's, for me, it's just a matter of putting out the ideas and thinking about them and talking to other people. It's just, the kind of thing that I think is just a natural, it's going to be a natural outcome, because most people are so upset about how we treat other animals and how we interact in the world.
So one of the ways of building a culture of empathy is just kind of bringing up the subject and start dialoguing about it and getting people to think about it and discuss it.
Yeah, I think so. One of my favorite sayings is "leap and the net will appear," and I kind of transport that into throw the ideas out there and people will grab them. A lot of people either don't know that they're there, or a lot of students with whom I speak are told. In fact, I just had an email this week from a woman. She said the subject line was, "Help me. I'm a vegetarian biology major who doesn't want to kill animals, but my professors say I have to." And it was a beautiful email about her interests and how she really wants to study biology but doesn't want to go about having to kill animals or harm them. And so I actually talked to her yesterday because, of course, we could have generated 5,000 emails, but in a half-hour conversation, we had a really good discussion about this. I told her about the culture of empathy. I told her about the compassionate conservation websites. And all of a sudden, I mean, you know, how would she know this? She's a 20-year-old undergraduate who's in a traditional biology program. So this is all new information to her. So it's wonderful, in fact. Yep.
So she's starting to think about having these ideas out there, and she's starting to think about, oh, maybe empathy is important. Her kind of connection, her own connection to her own empathy and compassion is important as well.
Yes, she was just telling me some personal stories about how she'd been reared and just, you know, how she really wanted to study biology. And she was heartbroken when one of her professors said something like, well, you can't do it because in order to do this work, you got to basically harm animals. And she said, no, I don't think so. And she had read one of my books and gone on the web and seen these websites for non-animal alternatives, you know, to dissection and to vivisection. So I probably get, I'd say 3 to 4 a month. So there's where my hope is too. How do you build a culture of empathy? I do a lot of work with Jane Goodall's Roots and Shoots programs with kids. And so that's how I'm going to build a culture of empathy too, is by getting to youngsters before their education destroys them. They're natural naturalists. They're compassionate and really play off of that and not let their education, you know, kind of distort them and destroy their empathic connections to animals in the world.
Well, I have to kind of admit here, when you're talking about that, it reminds me of being a kid myself and kind of having the magnifying glass and frying the ants and that kind of stuff. So
yeah.
I'm kind of revealing, you know, my part of my unempathic nature here. So it's kind of like, how did that kind of develop in myself? You know, having that lack of connection and, you know, wanting to create that pain into other beings.
Right. Yeah, I mean, I squashed some ants. Not a lot. Probably not as many as most people did. My parents told me when I was about 3, this was a conversation I had years later. I wrote a book called Minding Animals, and it came from a discussion I had with my folks of how I was always minding animals. So when I was young, I was always asking my folks, what are these animals, dogs usually, thinking or feeling? And minding also meant not only attributing minds to them. I mean, I didn't know what I was doing when I was 3 years old, but also minding and caring for them. And so, you know, was I perfect about that? No, I feel like I've gotten better over the years. But I think a lot of it came from being raised in a very compassionate home, very compassionate, empathic mother and dad, but my mom really stuck out in that arena. And so I think that, so I think that, you know, it's there in all of us, and I have no idea why people go in different ways, but my contacts with young kids and with students tells me that one reason is because authorities like biology professors and others just tell them this is what you have to do in order to major or study biology. You know.
So one of the other qualities or ways to, it seems to me, build a culture of empathy is the use of science now, and you've kind of written a lot about that recently. I've noticed about how rats are shown to have empathy, how all kinds of animals are shown to have empathy. Sure. So it seems that whole scientific studies now, especially like the work of Frans de Waal, is just showing that this empathy goes throughout, you know, at least mammals and perhaps beyond that too.
Yeah, I mean, you know, there was also a study last year that showed that chickens display empathy, and there's recent work. There's a recent book called "Do Fish Feel Pain?" and there's been a lot of work on fish showing that fish are sentient, conscious beings. They're very smart. And then there was a paper a couple of months ago done at a very prestigious animal behavior group in the United Kingdom showing that you can actually make honeybees pessimists. There had been work showing that you can actually make pigs pessimists, sort of take a dim view of their world. And there was a recent paper showing this on honeybees, and honeybees were showing the same changes in the brain, if you will, as we do. I mean, their brains are different, but, you know, the basic underlying neurochemicals. So you're right. I mean, the more we look, the more we find these commonalities. And if you buy into Darwin, and I think it's hard not to, he put forth this notion of evolutionary continuity, where he argued that the differences among species were differences in degree rather than differences in kind, meaning that the differences among species are not black and white, they're shades of gray. So for me, the bumper sticker for continuity is if we have something, other animals have it too. So if we have joy, they have joy. If we have empathy, they have empathy. If we grieve, they grieve. If we get jealous or anxious, they do too. And like I said, there's been no studies that are refuting those claims. Every day, it seems like my inbox on my email is filled with wonderful stories about amazing, you know, cognitive, emotional, and moral capacities among animals, and also showing, once again, the incredible ubiquity of pro-social, positive, empathic, and compassionate behaviors. So I think it's just a matter of time before it becomes the paradigm.
Yes, I wonder what that does for us as humans, saying, okay, the chickens have empathy, the rats have empathy, you know, chimpanzees and dolphins, and how does that affect how we interact with them?
Well, it should mandate that we don't harm them intentionally. And I think, once again, it's happening slowly but surely. Certainly not fast enough for me or most other people, but it's happening that animals are getting more protection, or it's happening that people, even if there aren't new regulations and new laws, the people themselves, students, are saying, no, I'm not going to do this anymore. This is not the right way to treat these animals. So it's happening. But it's social movement. Once again, we can steep it in empathy, but it's going to take time. It just is. Mm-hmm. I try, it's kind of, I don't use the word animal liberation that much because it has so much baggage with it, but it took a long time for Black liberation and women's liberation. And so if building this culture of empathy for animals is part of the animal liberation movement, then we definitely are in for a long haul, but it's worth it. And it's gaining momentum. I mean, support's just coming from, people and organizations who never, ever even got involved in these issues.
Well, you'd wrote something here at the Animal Manifesto, and it said here is the humans and animals are basically empathic, compassionate, and fair beings, and that we can all do more to act on behalf of animals.
Right.
So what was that manifesto?
Well, one part of the manifesto was animals telling us to treat us better or leave them alone. And the other, I guess that was the manifesto, but once again, the ingredients for it was tapping into who we are, as compassionate beings. That we're not asking people to do anything unnatural. We're actually asking people to add kindness and compassion and empathy to the world. So I think that that's what's really important, that we're not asking people to do anything unnatural. We may be asking them to think and act out of the box. So I might be asking my scientific colleagues to not do certain things, or to continue doing certain studies, but to do them differently. Or, like I've argued in the past, not do them at all. There might be certain things that we can't do anymore. Knowing that mice and rats and chickens are display empathy because they're suffering their own pains and the pains of others. It's really a compounding situation. So as science, and I'm not saying science is the only answer, but as science uncovers all these facts about the amazing lives of animals, it really mandates that we factor that into how we treat them and how we, yeah.
If science is just one of the answers, what are some of the other ones then?
Well, I like going on gut feelings. And one of the reasons I like going on that and spirituality, if you will, is because gut feelings that I and others have had about other animals are being revealed scientifically. So people talk about surprises in the study of animal cognition or animal emotions, and I don't find these to be surprises at all. I'm not surprised that rats show empathy or mice show empathy or chickens show empathy. They're social animals. They have the parts of the brain that are needed, or the parts of the brains that we use in when we express these capacities and these feelings. So I'm not surprised at all. So I also say, not in an anti-scientific way, but I also say that we don't need to learn anything more about any other animals to warrant more protection for them. We just don't. We know enough right now. So we're kind of dotting the I's and crossing the T's and putting the icing on the cake. But now that we know that so for example, in the United States, we've known that mice display empathy. A paper was published 6 years ago. That's not been factored into the Federal Animal Welfare Act. In fact, the Federal Animal Welfare Act in the United States says that rats and mice and birds and fish and invertebrates are not animals. It's a quote to say that they've redefined animal to exclude those groups of fill in the blank. They're surely not plants. So that's kind of distressing to me that the knowledge that we have had for 6 years has not factored into any revision of the Animal Welfare Act. And now you can add chickens and rats, if you will, to the mix. And we already know about elephants and other mammals. So, slowly but surely, we're going to have to do something with what we know in terms of how we treat other animals.
So it's kind of like people know about this now and just feel distressed that, hey, they're not incorporating it into their lives and policies and actions.
I think it's going to be harder for people to justify what they're doing. I mean, just yesterday I came across a paper, or a couple of days ago, where there's a committee who deals with animal welfare for the United States at the National Institutes of Health, said that the cages for females, breeding females and their families, for mice and rats have to be made larger. So now mice and their families can be kept in cages at a 7 by 7, which is not very big, and rats 12 by 12. And a lot of researchers are in a tiz about it because they're saying, oh, it's going to cost us more money. We won't be able to breed as much. They're just whining. Well, the fact is 7 by 7 and 12 by 12 is hardly enough area. So it's not like the new suggestions. They're only guidelines. They're not laws or rules, are causing them to be really upset. But not one of them ever factored in the knowledge that both mice and rats display empathy and care about what happens to them and what happens to their friends or their cage mates. They're just whining. It's going to cost too much money. We won't be able to do all the research and we won't be able to breed all the animals. Well, that's good. As far as I'm concerned, they should just put that on hold right now.
Well, something else I was seeing here, from having looked at your website, that you had something called the compassion footprint. Is that something you're still working on, or was wondering what that kind of meant?
Yeah, I kind of developed that idea because of the carbon footprint. And the compassion footprint would be how we can add more compassion and empathy and goodness to the world, and how we can reduce, adding, bad things. And in Dr. Keltner's book, he talks about the notion of Gen from Confucianism, and also he develops what he calls a Gen ratio, sort of the ratio of good things versus bad things that we do. I didn't know about this while I was writing, and then I came across it, and then Dr. and I have had some really great email and phone exchanges about it. So it's basically countering the carbon footprint and saying, okay, let's look at our compassion footprint. How can we expand it to other animals, and what actions would underlie the expansion of this footprint. So it's, we're leaving footprints all over. So I would like to. It's my optimistic and my kind of positive nature to think about a compassion footprint rather than something negative. So okay. I'm still working on it. People have liked it and have adopted it. But like I said, it's always a work in progress. Like this, rewilding our hearts would be part of expanding our compassion. Rewilding our hearts would build from the notion of expanding our compassion footprint.
So another word for rewilding our hearts is re-empathizing our hearts almost.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, I have to write that down.
You heard it first here.
Yeah, in fact, I'm grabbing a little pad and I'm writing it down. I will give you full credit. No, but right. I'm also writing in this book. I also have a chapter called that we are what I call the regeneration. We're recreating, we're restoring, we're reinvigorating, we're reconnecting, we're redoing. And the argument is part of the rewilding is we've got to get out of this putting out the fires mindset and become proactive. And part of the proactivity, of course, would be to bring empathy back in, just doing what's naturally. I mean, there's no other, Edwin, there's no other way to say it. As you've said it, many times, it's just doing what's natural. It's who we are. And we have to stop reinventing and redoing and recreating and restoring. We just got to stop the reing because we're going to run out of time and we're not going to be able to re-empathize either.
Yeah. So just start being.
Just start being, exactly. I was writing that this afternoon. Just start being who we are and start being and stop the reing. Exactly.
Well, I think we could really dialogue a lot more because it's kind of like, how do you be, and maybe addressing the fears, right? It's the fears and all the things that maybe keep us from being. But we had talked about maybe about 30 minutes for this dialogue, and I don't want to go over it. Mm-hmm. And so... and we're also losing the light. You're slowly fading to black here.
Yes, I can open up the...
as the light there, I guess in Colorado, slowly, as the sun slowly sets there.
There's a mountain behind me, an mountain. Yes, so I'm kind of in a little below the peaks of some hills, but I think it just maybe got a touch lighter.
Oh, it did, yeah. Maybe the clouds or something are going across the...
There we go. Yeah, well, I mean, if you want to continue some other time, yeah, no, this is great because I like I said, I really think this idea of a culture of empathy has an amazing amount of force, and it's going to take a lot of work, but I think because we're tapping into our basic nature, it may not be as difficult as some think it is. It's going to be frustrating. I mean, I spend a lot of my days just really frustrated with people.
Yeah.
Like I always say, people say I love animals and they harm them, and I say, well, I'm glad you don't love me. So when people tell me that they empathize with animals and they do all these horrible things, I ask them what allows you to use those, like almost those two words together, empathy and killing or harming. And they always stumble. You see interviews with hunters where they say, I hunt deer because I love them. And I'm thinking, oh, my God. I feel safe in your presence because I'm sure you don't love me. But I actually think seriously we need to deal with those sorts of disconnected ideas. And maybe rewilding again is reconnecting, our feelings and our actions, But as you know, because you've been doing it for a really long time, you just have to keep doing it and never say never. Just keep doing it. Like leap in the net will appear.
Well, I'm really excited about Skype now, that it kind of opens up these kind of dialogues, and you talked about talking with Daphner and others, that I'm hoping that we can create perhaps, group dialogues around different aspects. So if you're wanting to talk with him at some point or others, you can make it into a group dialogue and actually record it and kind of put it out for public view.
Yeah, it would be great. Yes, I will think about that. That would be wonderful. Yeah.
And so we can have these dialogues from the comfort of, our homes and our bathrobes or out on the beach. I just got a new a new smartphone, and the thing does Skype. So, I mean, it's amazing.
Yeah, my phone, which just fell off the couch, does Skype on it too. But I think it's great because I travel a lot, over 100,000 miles a year. So I've given a few talks on Skype, and it's actually been better. I don't have to go to the airport. They can see me, and then we had a wonderful question-answer period of people coming up. So this is great. Let's just keep doing it.
Okay, well, thank you so much. I've really enjoyed it and looking forward to our next conversations. And we'll have this online, I think, by tomorrow. So
yeah, let me know, would you?
Okay, definitely. Okay, Mark, until the next time, thank you so much.
Thank you, Edwin.
Okay.
Thanks for all you do.
Okay, bye.
See the world through other people's eyes. Now, empathy is a quality of character that can change the world.